It happened 23 minutes into what Adam Schiff thought was going to be his finest hour, his moment of triumph, his chance to finally interrogate President Trump on live television in front of 78 million Americans. 23 minutes into what was supposed to be the culmination of 8 years of relentless pursuit, 8 years of cable news appearances and committee hearings and carefully worded accusations, 8 years of building himself into the singular face of opposition to a man he had called a traitor, a puppet, a compromised agent of a hostile foreign power. 23 minutes into the press conference where Adam Schiff, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, now United States Senator from the state of California, self-proclaimed defender of democracy and guardian of classified truths too dangerous for ordinary Americans to see, was going to ask the questions that Donald Trump had supposedly been dodging since 2016. Questions about Russia, questions about collusion, questions about secret meetings in Trump Tower and back channels to the Kremlin, and compromising material and financial entanglements, and every single dark suspicion that had fueled the most consequential political saga in modern American history. 23 minutes into what Adam Schiff believed with every fiber of his being was going to be the defining moment of his career, the moment history would remember him for, the moment he would finally, irrevocably, permanently hold Donald Trump accountable before the eyes of the entire nation. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Not casually, not in the way politicians usually prepare for press conferences or Sunday show appearances, scanning a few briefing papers in the car on the way to the studio. No, Adam Schiff had been preparing for this the way a prosecutor prepares for the trial of the century. He had assembled a team, his chief of staff, his communications director, his legislative counsel, 2 former federal prosecutors he had brought on as special advisors, and a media strategist who had helped prepare witnesses for congressional testimony. They had turned his Senate office into a war room. Whiteboards covered every wall. Timelines of Trump's Russia contacts stretched across one entire side of the room, color-coded by date and type of interaction and level of suspicion. On the opposite wall, a list of potential questions, ranked by effectiveness, each one followed by 3 or 4 possible Trump responses, and the devastating follow-up that would be delivered regardless of which response he chose. Schiff's opening question had been written and rewritten 47 times. He had practiced delivering it in front of a mirror, in front of his staff, in front of a camera so he could review his facial expressions and body language. He had practiced it in the shower in the car, lying in bed at 3 in the morning when the adrenaline of anticipation wouldn't let him sleep. It was, he believed, perfect. A question designed not to elicit information, but to deliver an indictment. It accused Trump of concealing Russian contacts while pretending to merely ask for clarification. Classic courtroom technique. The kind of question that makes the accusation the point, that plants the damaging narrative in the minds of the audience before the answer even begins, that forces the person on the receiving end to either confess or look guilty by denying what has already been presented as established fact. It was the kind of question prosecutors ask when they already know the truth and just want the defendant to hang himself trying to explain it away. Schiff had 50 more just like it, lined up in sequence, each one building on the last, each one designed to tighten the noose another fraction of an inch. He was going to dismantle Donald Trump on live television, piece by piece, question by question, and the whole world was going to watch. What Adam Schiff did not know, what he had absolutely no way of knowing because he had spent 8 years operating under the unshakable assumption that the classified information he had been privy to would remain classified forever, safely locked away in secure compartmented information facilities where no journalist could access it and no political opponent could weaponize it, was that Donald Trump had declassified everything. Not some of it, not the convenient parts, not a carefully curated selection designed to tell one side of the story. Everything. Every classified briefing Adam Schiff had attended from January 2017 to January 2024. Every intelligence assessment about alleged connections between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Every FBI counterintelligence report. Every CIA analysis. Every National Security Agency intercept summary. Every briefing document prepared for the Gang of 8. the small group of senior congressional leaders entrusted with the most sensitive intelligence in the United States government. Every document that showed, in black and white, with dates and signatures and official classification markings, exactly what Adam Schiff had actually been told in those secret briefings behind closed doors in secure facilities, compared to what he had told the American public when he walked out of those facilities and stood in front of television cameras. All of it declassified, all of it reviewed through proper channels, all of it approved for public release by the relevant classification authorities, all of it compiled into a comprehensive presentation, organized chronologically, cross-referenced with Schiff's public statements, matched against his television appearances, annotated with the specific contradictions between what the classified record showed and what the senator had claimed. All of it loaded onto the massive high-definition screens that flanked the presidential podium in the East Room of the White House, ready to be displayed at the touch of a button to the 78 million Americans watching at home and the 300 journalists packed into the room, and the billions of people around the world who would see the clips within hours. And now, 23 minutes into the press conference, Donald Trump was holding up the first document, the most important one, the one that would start the unraveling, the one that would begin the process of destroying everything Adam Schiff had built, everything he had claimed, everything he had staked his reputation and his career and his legacy on. The document was projected on the screens, 10 feet tall, every word legible to every camera in the room, every person watching at home able to read the text as clearly as if they were holding the paper in their own hands. Classified Intelligence Brief, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Gang of 8 Briefing, March 15, 2017, declassified January 15, 2025, FBI Counterintelligence Assessment, investigation into potential coordination between Trump campaign and Russian government. Status: no evidence of coordination or conspiracy found to date. Multiple contacts between campaign associates and Russian nationals confirmed, but contacts alone do not indicate conspiracy. Investigations continuing, but no credible intelligence suggests coordination at this time. The date was there, March 15, 2017. The classification markings were there. The declassification stamp was there. The signature page was there, showing every member of Congress who had attended that briefing, and there, third from the top, in handwriting that would be verified by forensic document analysts within hours, was the signature of Adam Schiff, then the ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And Adam Schiff's face, that face that had become one of the most recognizable in American politics, the face that had perfected the look of grave concern, of serious intelligence professional, of man weighed down by terrible knowledge he was legally forbidden from sharing with the public, but morally compelled to hint at, to suggest, to allude to in the most alarming terms possible. That face was doing something faces should never do on live television in front of 78 million people. It was cycling through emotions in rapid succession, each one visible, each one readable, each one captured by a dozen cameras simultaneously. Confusion first, the briefest flash, a man seeing something unexpected. Then recognition, the synapses firing, the brain connecting the document on the screen to the memory of sitting in that briefing room 8 years ago. Then realization, the understanding of what this meant, of what was about to happen, of what Trump was about to do with this document, and presumably with the dozens of others that must be waiting behind it. Then horror, pure and undisguised, the expression of a man who has just watched the ground open beneath his feet and realized there is nothing to grab onto. And finally panic, the look of someone desperately calculating escape routes and finding none, because there is no escape from your own signature on a document that proves you lied. Not when that document is projected on a screen 10 feet tall in front of 78 million people. He knew what was coming next. He could see it unfolding in his mind like a nightmare he had never allowed himself to have because he had never believed it was possible. He knew that Trump was going to show what Schiff had said the day after that briefing, the day after the FBI had explicitly told him they had found no evidence of coordination or conspiracy. He knew that Trump was going to play the clip of Schiff going on national television and telling Chuck Todd, telling America, telling the world that he had seen more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. He knew that Trump was going to show the contradiction, side by side, the classified briefing versus the public statement, the truth versus the lie. And he knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones like ice water, that this was not going to be the only document, that Trump had not gone through the trouble of declassifying a single briefing, that there were more documents behind this one, stacked up like dominoes, each one showing the same pattern, each one proving the same thing, each one another nail in the coffin of a career that had been built, painstakingly and deliberately, on the foundation of lies that were supposed to stay classified forever. The lie that had started everything. The claim that he had seen evidence when the evidence said there was none. The claim he had repeated not once or twice, but 227 times over the course of 2 years, on every cable news network, on every Sunday morning show, in every committee hearing room, always with that same expression of grave concern, always with that same careful formulation that suggested he knew terrible things he was forbidden from revealing, always wielding the classification system as both a sword and a shield, using it to give his claims the weight of insider knowledge while simultaneously using it to prevent anyone from verifying whether those claims were true. The Russia hoax, the investigations, the special counsel, the impeachments, the years of division and suspicion and conspiracy theories and destroyed reputations, all of it built on the foundation of Adam Schiff telling the American people he had seen evidence that the classified briefings explicitly said did not exist. And now, 23 minutes into what was supposed to be his finest hour, everyone was about to see the proof. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, to this frozen second where a single declassified document became the first shot in a barrage that would level a career built on 8 years of carefully constructed lies, we need to go back, not far, just 90 minutes, to when Adam Schiff still believed he was the hunter and not the prey. 2 weeks before the press conference, the White House had released an unusual announcement. It came not from the president's social media accounts, or from a campaign rally, or from a casual remark to reporters on the South Lawn, but from the official White House press office, distributed through formal channels, written in the measured language of a government communication, rather than the combative rhetoric that had characterized most of Trump's public statements over the past decade. President Donald J. Trump will hold a special press conference on January 29, 2025, as part of a new transparency initiative. The topic will be addressing years of misinformation about Russian collusion and restoring trust in government intelligence processes. The press secretary had elaborated during the daily briefing. She stood at the podium, calm and precise, reading from prepared remarks that had been carefully crafted to sound routine while containing information that was anything but. This will not be a standard press conference. The president wants to address the lingering questions that have divided this country for nearly a decade. Questions about Russia, about the investigations, about the impeachments, about what the intelligence community actually knew versus what the public was told. And to ensure this is a genuine dialogue rather than a one-sided presentation, the president is extending a special invitation. She paused, and the pause itself was significant. A beat of silence that every reporter in the room would later recognize as the moment the trap was baited. The president has specifically invited Senator Adam Schiff of California to attend the press conference as a special guest questioner. Senator Schiff has been one of the most prominent voices regarding Russia matters for the past 8 years. He led 2 impeachment inquiries. He served as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He has repeatedly stated that he possesses knowledge from classified briefings that supports his allegations against the president. The president believes in transparency and accountability, and he is willing to answer tough questions from those who have investigated him most aggressively. Senator Schiff will have a reserved seat in the front row and first question privileges. The president looks forward to a frank and honest exchange. The media reaction was instantaneous and electric. Every network broke into regular programming to report the announcement. Every cable news anchor led with it. Every political reporter in Washington immediately began working their phones, calling sources, trying to figure out the angle, trying to understand why Trump would voluntarily put himself in a room with Adam Schiff and a microphone. The conventional wisdom, established quickly and repeated with the confidence that comes from years of covering politics in predictable patterns, was that Trump was making a mistake, a huge mistake, an unforced error of historic proportions. Adam Schiff was a former prosecutor. He had spent 8 years studying Trump, investigating Trump, building cases against Trump. He knew every vulnerability, every contradiction, every unanswered question. Putting him in the front row with first question privileges was like putting a shark in a swimming pool and jumping in with a paper cut. CNN's coverage was breathless. Trump finally faces his nemesis, the Chiron Red, and the panel of analysts and former prosecutors and political strategists spent 3 hours discussing how Schiff would approach the questioning, what traps he would set, how Trump would try to evade, and how the whole thing would likely end with Trump looking evasive and guilty and Schiff looking like the righteous prosecutor who had finally cornered his quarry. They brought on body language experts to discuss how Schiff's posture and eye contact would convey authority and command. They brought on former trial lawyers to analyze Schiff's questioning technique and marvel at how effective it would be in this setting. They brought on historians to put the event in context, comparing it to the Army McCarthy hearings and the Watergate testimony, and every other moment in American history where a powerful figure had been forced to face questioning from someone who was prepared and capable and relentless. MSNBC went even further. They produced a special countdown segment, The Reckoning. Schiff Gets His Chance, that ran every evening for 2 weeks, counting down the days until the press conference. Each episode featured a different aspect of the Trump-Russia story, rehashing the allegations, the investigations, the unanswered questions, all building toward the climactic moment when Adam Schiff would finally get to ask those questions directly, face to face, with no Republican committee chairman to gavel him down and no time limit to cut him off. The production value was extraordinary. Dramatic music, slow-motion footage of Schiff walking through the Capitol, split-screen comparisons of Trump's denials and the evidence that supposedly contradicted them. It was not journalism. It was a promotional campaign for what they expected to be the political event of the decade. Even Fox News, which was typically favorable to the president, could not resist the drama of the confrontation. Their coverage was more cautious, noting that the president had something planned, that this was not an impulsive decision, that Trump would not have invited his most aggressive critic into the White House unless he had a strategy. But even their analysts acknowledged the risk. They discussed the possibility that Schiff would ask devastating questions, that the media would declare him the winner regardless of what actually happened, that the whole thing could backfire spectacularly. The consensus, across every network and every publication, was that this was going to be the most watched press conference in American history, and that Adam Schiff was going to dominate it. Adam Schiff certainly thought so. He held his own press conference to announce that he was accepting the invitation, and he treated it like a victory lap before the race had even begun. He stood at a podium in the Senate, American flags behind him, cameras everywhere, looking like a man who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Because in a sense he had. Everything he had done for the past 8 years, every television appearance, every committee hearing, every carefully leaked piece of classified information, every dramatic statement about evidence he had seen but could not share, had been building toward a moment exactly like this one. A moment where he would stand face to face with Donald Trump and demand answers. A moment where the whole country would be watching. A moment where truth, as he defined it, would triumph over lies. "I want to thank President Trump for this invitation," he began, and his voice had the quality it always had when he was performing for cameras, grave and measured and layered with the suggestion of vast knowledge held in reserve, like an iceberg showing only its tip while the massive, dangerous bulk remained hidden beneath the surface. The American people deserve answers. They deserve truth. They deserve accountability. For 8 years, I have worked to uncover the full extent of Russian interference in our democracy and the potential compromise of a sitting president. I have seen evidence I have been unable to share because of its classified nature, that raises profound questions about this president's fitness for office and his loyalty to this country." He paused, and the pause was rehearsed, timed to the second, designed to let the weight of his words settle on the audience like a physical force. "I have questions the president has been avoiding for 8 years. Questions about Russian interference and his campaign's willingness to benefit from it. Questions about contacts between his associates and Russian intelligence operatives. Questions about his finances and potential compromises that foreign powers may hold over him. Questions about intelligence community assessments he has dismissed and denigrated. Questions about January 6th and potential foreign influence on that dark day in our history." He paused again. "It is time for transparency. It is time for truth. I look forward to this conversation." The Democratic base reacted with something close to euphoria. Social media exploded with support. Schiff was trending within minutes. Fundraising emails from his office and from the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee flooded inboxes, framing the upcoming press conference as a historic confrontation between truth and lies, between democracy and authoritarianism, between the rule of law and the lawlessness that Schiff had spent 8 years documenting and condemning. Donations poured in. Schiff raised $4.7 million in the 48 hours after announcing his acceptance, a figure that would later become one of the most painful ironies of his career, given how spectacularly the event would destroy the very reputation that had generated those donations. Behind the scenes, Schiff's staff was preparing like it was the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the final exam of law school all combined into a single afternoon. They had divided the preparation into categories. Russia contacts, broken into subcategories by individual, by date, by type of interaction. Financial entanglements, organized by entity and transaction. Intelligence community assessments, sorted by date and level of classification. The Ukraine phone call with the transcript annotated line by line. January 6th, with a timeline of events and communications. The Mueller report, with highlighted sections that Schiff believed had been underemphasized by the media. Each category had a lead researcher, a primary question, 3 backup questions, anticipated Trump responses, and follow-up questions designed to close every escape route. They ran mock sessions. Schiff's chief of staff played Trump, doing his best impression of the president's speaking style, his tendency to digress, his combative instincts, his habit of answering questions with counter-accusations. Schiff practiced staying focused, refusing to take the bait, redirecting every tangent back to the core question, maintaining the calm, prosecutorial demeanor that had become his trademark. He practiced his facial expressions in front of the camera, making sure he projected the right mix of seriousness and concern. He practiced his pauses, his transitions, his closing statements. He practiced looking into the camera during key moments so that the television audience would feel he was speaking directly to them. Every question was crafted to achieve one of 2 outcomes: either get a damaging admission from Trump or make Trump look evasive and guilty by refusing to answer directly. There was no scenario in which Schiff's team believed they could lose. The questions were too good. The evidence was too strong. The preparation was too thorough. Adam Schiff was going to walk into the White House and dismantle a presidency on live television, and there was nothing Donald Trump or anyone else could do to stop it. What none of them knew, what none of them could have imagined because it required accepting a possibility that Schiff had spent 8 years refusing to contemplate, was that in a secure facility at FBI headquarters, Director Kash Patel had spent 6 months compiling something far more devastating than anything Schiff's team had prepared. An 847-page dossier on Adam Schiff himself. Not opposition research in the traditional sense, not the kind of thing campaigns put together to find embarrassing quotes or financial inconsistencies. This was something else entirely. This was a comprehensive, meticulously documented, forensically verified accounting of every lie Adam Schiff had told the American public over the course of 8 years, matched against the classified record that proved each one was a lie. Every classified briefing Schiff had attended, every intelligence assessment he had been shown, every FBI report he had been briefed on, Every time he had walked out of a secure facility and gone on television and said something that directly contradicted what he had just been told. Every phone call to reporters that had preceded a leak of classified information, matched against phone records obtained during the FBI's investigation into unauthorized disclosures. Every coordination with FBI officials who were later fired or disciplined for misconduct. Every fabrication. Every distortion. Every carefully worded half-truth designed to mislead without technically lying, though many of them crossed even that generous line. Every instance where Schiff had used his security clearance and his position on the Intelligence Committee to lend credibility to claims that the classified records showed were false. All of it documented, all of it cross-referenced, all of it verified by multiple sources, all of it organized chronologically and thematically, all of it annotated with the relevant classified materials that proved each contradiction, and all of it declassified the week before the press conference, properly, legally, through the appropriate channels, reviewed by the relevant classification authorities, approved for public release, loaded onto secure servers, and prepared for display on the screens in the East Room of the White House. The trap was set. Adam Schiff just did not know he was walking into it. He thought he was walking into a fight he had been preparing for his entire career. He thought the screens behind the podium were for Trump's use, perhaps to display some exculpatory document or self-serving timeline. He thought the invitation was an act of hubris, a president so confident in his own ability to talk his way out of anything that he was willing to face his most formidable critic on live television. He thought he was the prosecutor and Trump was the defendant. He thought he was the hunter and Trump was the prey. He was wrong about all of it, and by the time he realized it, 78 million people were watching. The day of the press conference arrived like a gathering storm. January 29, 2025, a Wednesday. The weather in Washington was cold and gray, the kind of winter day where the sky looks like a lid that has been placed over the city, pressing everything down, making the white marble of government buildings glow faintly against the overcast background. The White House East Room was packed beyond its normal capacity. Every major network had sent their top correspondents. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS. International press from the BBC, Sky News, Al Jazeera, NHK, France 24. Digital media outlets that normally covered politics from behind laptops in Brooklyn apartments had sent reporters in person, because everyone understood that whatever was about to happen in this room was going to be significant. The total number of credentialed journalists exceeded 300, and the room, which normally held about 200 comfortably, was straining at the seams. Reporters stood 3 deep against the walls. Camera operators jostled for position. Sound technicians threaded cables across the floor in patterns that would have given a safety inspector nightmares. The air was warm and slightly humid from the density of bodies, and there was a smell that people who attend these events know well, the combination of coffee and hair product and dry-cleaned suits and nervous energy. At the front of the room, the presidential podium stood with the seal of the President of the United States affixed to its front. Behind it, 2 massive high-definition screens, larger than what was normally used for press conferences, had been installed on either side. The White House had explained that they were for transparency purposes, to display any documents or evidence the president referenced during his remarks. Nobody had thought much of this explanation at the time. It seemed like a minor logistical detail, a visual aid, something to make the event more television-friendly. Nobody had looked at those screens and seen them for what they were, the instruments of Adam Schiff's destruction. And in the front row, in a specially designated seat with a small white placard that read Senator Adam Schiff, guest questioner, sat the man himself. He had arrived early, a deliberate choice, wanting to be seen settling in, reviewing his notes, projecting the image of a man so prepared and so confident that he had no need to make a dramatic entrance. He wore a dark blue suit, perfectly tailored, with a red tie that his media strategist had selected because it conveyed authority and confidence without being flashy. His shoes were polished. His hair was precisely arranged. He had the expression of someone about to do something historic, something important, something that would define his legacy and vindicate everything he had said and done for the past 8 years. He adjusted his tie. He reviewed his notes one final time, running his finger down the list of questions, mouthing the words silently. He whispered something to an aide sitting directly behind him, a young man in a gray suit who nodded and made a note on his phone. Everything about Skiff's posture and demeanor said the same thing. I am ready. I have been waiting for this moment, and I am going to make it count. He thought he was about to become the man who finally held Donald Trump accountable on live television. He had no idea he was about to become a cautionary tale about what happens when you spend 8 years lying about classified information, and someone finally declassifies it. President Trump entered the East Room at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. The press corps stood, as was customary. He walked to the podium with a gait that was noticeably different from his usual approach to these events. At rallies, he bounded to the stage, feeding off the energy of the crowd, waving and pointing and basking in the adulation. At contentious press conferences, he strode to the podium with a combative energy, his jaw set, his eyes already scanning the room for hostile faces. But today, his walk was something else entirely. It was relaxed, almost casual. There was no urgency to it, no combativeness, no rally energy. He moved like a man who had all the time in the world and nowhere else he would rather be. He shook a few hands as he passed through the room, acknowledged people in the crowd with small nods, made brief eye contact with Schiff but did not linger on it. His expression was calm, controlled, the expression of someone who knows exactly how the next 2 hours are going to unfold because he wrote the script and everyone else is an unwitting actor in it. He arranged some papers on the podium, placed a small remote control next to them, the kind used to advance PowerPoint presentations, black and sleek and innocuous. He glanced at the screens behind him, a quick check to make sure they were functioning. Then he looked out at the packed room, at the hundreds of faces and dozens of cameras, at the lights and the microphones and the barely contained anticipation that filled the air like an electrical charge, and he began to speak. Thank you all for being here. We have a lot to cover today, so let us get started. His voice was measured, conversational, lacking the punchy cadence of his rally speeches. This press conference is about transparency, about truth, about showing the American people what actually happened over the past 8 years versus what they were told happened. He paused, and the pause was masterful, a beat of silence that drew every eye and every ear more tightly to him. For 8 years, I have been accused of colluding with Russia. I have been investigated. I have been impeached twice. I have been called a traitor, a Putin puppet, an agent of a foreign power. My family has been harassed. My businesses have been targeted. My supporters have been demonized, all because certain people told America that I was working with Russia to undermine our democracy. His gaze swept the room, making contact with dozens of eyes before settling on a point somewhere in the middle distance. And for 8 years, certain people, people with access to classified intelligence, people with security clearances, people in positions of public trust, told the American public that they had seen evidence. Direct evidence. More than circumstantial evidence. Compelling evidence that I was compromised. Now his eyes moved to Schiff and they stayed there. The camera operators, sensing the shift in energy, tightened their shots. They told you to trust them. They could not show you the evidence because it was classified, secret, sensitive, national security, but trust them, they said. They had seen it in classified briefings. They knew. Trump's hand moved to the remote control, his fingers resting on it lightly, the gesture as casual as a man reaching for a cup of coffee. Well, today we are going to look at what they actually saw, because I have declassified it, all of it, every classified briefing, every intelligence assessment, every FBI report about Trump-Russia connections, all declassified, all approved for public release, all available online right now this minute for anyone to verify. He gestured to the screens behind him. These screens are going to show you actual classified documents from actual intelligence briefings attended by actual members of Congress. You will see what certain members were actually told versus what they told you. He paused again, and this time the silence had a different quality, heavier, more consequential, like the moment between a lightning flash and the thunder that follows. He picked up the remote, and we are going to start with the person who has been most vocal about this. Senator Schiff, as I promised, you have the first question. The cameras swung to Schiff with the speed and precision of machines that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Every lens in the room reoriented. Every camera operator adjusted focus. The split-screen graphics that the networks had prepared, Trump on one side and Schiff on the other, went live simultaneously on every channel. This was the moment that millions of people had tuned in to see. The confrontation, the clash, the prosecutorial questioning that was going to expose the truth. Schiff stood up. A White House aide approached with a wireless microphone and handed it to him with a small nod. Schiff took it smoothly, comfortably, with the practiced ease of a man who had held microphones in high-pressure situations thousands of times. He was standing now, which gave him a slight physical advantage, a sense of presence and authority that came from being on his feet while others were seated. Every camera in the room was focused on his face. The lighting caught him perfectly, illuminating his features in that slightly theatrical way that the East Room's fixtures tended to produce. He looked confident. He looked ready. This was what he had prepared for. This was the opening salvo, the question that would set the tone for everything that followed. Thank you, Mr. President. My question is straightforward. Why did you and members of your campaign have so many documented contacts with Russian officials and Russian intelligence operatives during the 2016 election? And why did you and your team repeatedly lie about those contacts and attempt to conceal them from investigators? It was a perfect prosecutor's question, technically two questions woven into one, each one containing embedded assumptions that did the real work of the sentence. The question assumed that the contacts were numerous and suspicious. It assumed that Trump had lied about them. It assumed concealment from investigators. It assumed wrongdoing as the baseline and demanded an explanation for the wrongdoing rather than asking whether wrongdoing had occurred. It was the kind of question that law professors use as examples of how to control a narrative through interrogation, how to make the accusation the substance and the question merely the delivery vehicle. The room waited. Every journalist, every camera operator, every person watching at home expected what always happened when Trump was asked a hostile question. The denial, the attack on the questioner, the deflection to a tangent about witch hunts and fake news and corrupt media, the raising of the voice, the pointing of the finger, the stream of consciousness that would eventually circle back to something vaguely related to the original question, but would mostly serve to eat up time and change the subject. Instead, Donald Trump smiled. It was not his rally smile, the big, crowd-pleasing grin that accompanied his greatest hits. It was something quieter, something that, in retrospect, every person in that room would describe as the smile of a man who has been dealt the exact card he was waiting for. A man who has been playing a very long game and has just realized that his opponent has made the final move that triggers the endgame. Great question, Senator. Perfect question, actually, because it lets me show everyone something very important. He pressed the remote. The screens behind him came to life, and what appeared on them, projected in high definition, 10 feet tall, legible from every corner of the room, was a document. It had official classified markings at the top, the kind that anyone who has worked in government or intelligence would immediately recognize as authentic. Across the front, in large red letters, was a declassification stamp. Classified Intelligence Brief. House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Gang of 8 Briefing. March 15, 2017. Subject: FBI Counterintelligence Investigation Trump Campaign. Declassified January 15, 2025. The text of the document was clearly visible, every word sharp and legible on those massive screens. FBI Counterintelligence Assessment. Investigation into potential coordination between Trump campaign and Russian government has been ongoing since July 2016. Multiple contacts between campaign associates and Russian nationals have been confirmed and are being investigated. However, to date, investigators have found no evidence of coordination or conspiracy between the campaign and the Russian government. Contacts alone do not indicate conspiracy or coordination. FBI will continue investigating and will update committee as new information becomes available. But current assessment is that no credible intelligence supports allegations of campaign coordination with Russian government. Trump let it sit on the screen. He did not speak. He did not move. He just stood at the podium and let the words hang there in the air and on the screens and in the consciousness of 78 million Americans. Let everyone in the room read them. Let everyone at home absorb them. Let the silence do the work, because the words were doing all the heavy lifting by themselves. No evidence of coordination or conspiracy. That was what the FBI had told the most senior intelligence officials in Congress on March 15, 2017. No evidence, not some evidence, not troubling evidence, not more than circumstantial evidence. No evidence. Then Trump read it aloud, slowly, clearly, enunciating each word with the deliberate precision of a man who understands that what he is saying will be replayed millions of times. No evidence of coordination or conspiracy found to date. That is what the FBI told the Gang of Eight briefing, which included you, Senator Schiff, on March 15, 2017. He pressed the remote again. A new document appeared. A signature page, attendance log, a list of names printed and then signed beside each entry confirming that these individuals had attended the briefing and been read in on the material. And there it was, third from the top, Adam Schiff, Ranking Member, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. His printed name and beside it his signature, unmistakable, unambiguous, undeniable. You were there, Trump said. You saw this assessment. You signed the log confirming you had been briefed. Another pause. The silence in the room was not the normal silence of a press conference, where background noise, shuffling papers, whispered conversations, the hum of equipment, creates a constant low murmur. This was absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens when 300 people simultaneously stop breathing. And then the very next day, March 16, 2017, you went on Meet the Press. Want to see what you said? A video clip began playing on the screens. Adam Schiff, sitting across from Chuck Todd on the set of Meet the Press, the familiar NBC studio graphics visible in the background. Todd asking a question about the investigation. Schiff responding with his signature expression of grave concern, the furrowed brow, the slightly downturned mouth, the eyes that suggested vast reservoirs of classified knowledge lurking behind them. I have seen more than circumstantial evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. His voice on the recording was calm, assured, the voice of a man stating a fact so obvious that it hardly needed stating. More than circumstantial evidence. Not suspicion, not concern, not questions that need answering. More than circumstantial evidence of collusion. Trump paused the video. The screen froze on Schiff's face, mid-sentence, the words "more than circumstantial evidence" still visible in the subtitle bar at the bottom of the screen. And now that face, the real face, the live face, the face sitting in the front row of the East Room, was visible on the other half of every split screen on every television in America, and the contrast between the two was devastating. The face on the recording looked confident, authoritative, certain. The face in the front row looked like it was watching a building collapse in slow motion, and realizing it was the building it was standing in. More than circumstantial, Trump said. You said that on national television the day after the FBI told you explicitly that they had found no evidence of coordination or conspiracy. He looked directly at Schiff, and the look was not combative, not angry, not taunting. It was something more damaging than any of those things. It was calm, patient, the look of a teacher presenting evidence to a student who has been caught cheating. So my question to you, Senator, is this. Were you lying to Chuck Todd, or were you lying in the classified briefing? Because those two things cannot both be true. The room was so quiet that a reporter later said she could hear the Secret Service agent's earpieces crackling from 15 feet away. Every eye in the room was on Schiff. Every camera was zoomed to its tightest frame on his face. His expression had changed completely. The confidence that had radiated from him when he stood to ask his question was gone, dissolved so rapidly and so completely that it was as if it had been a mask that had simply fallen off. In its place was something that looked like a man who had just realized he had walked into a trap he could not escape. His mouth opened. Words came out, but they lacked the force and certainty that had characterized everything he had said for the past 8 years. "Mr. President, I think you are taking my words out of context." Trump held up a hand. The gesture was not aggressive. It was almost gentle, the way a doctor might raise a hand to stop a patient from getting off the examination table. "Context. Let me show you some more context." The screen changed. A timeline appeared. It was formatted like a legal exhibit, dates running down the left side, events described on the right, each entry color-coded to distinguish between classified briefings and public statements. March 15, 2017. Gang of 8 briefing, FBI reports no evidence of coordination. March 16, 2017. Schiff on MSNBC, more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. March 20, 2017. Schiff on CNN, evidence that is not circumstantial and is very much worthy of investigation. May 15, 2017. Schiff on MSNBC, I think there is evidence that is not circumstantial. July 21, 2017. Schiff on CNN, plenty of evidence of collusion. September 18, 2017. Schiff on MSNBC, I cannot go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence. The timeline continued, date after date, appearance after appearance. Different networks, different shows, different hosts, different dates, same claim. I have seen evidence. The scrolling list seemed to go on forever. Each entry another instance of the same assertion delivered with the same grave certainty. Each one matched against the classified briefing that preceded it. Each one contradicted by the official record that Adam Schiff had signed confirming he had been told the exact opposite of what he then told the American public. "You went on television 227 times over the next 2 years claiming you had seen evidence of collusion," Trump said. "We counted. My staff went through every interview, every cable news hit, every Sunday show appearance, every committee hearing statement. 227 times you said some variation of 'I have seen evidence.'" He pressed the remote again. A video supercut began playing. Adam Schiff on CNN, March 2017. Adam Schiff on MSNBC, April 2017. Adam Schiff on ABC, May 2017. Adam Schiff on CBS, June 2017. The same face, the same expression, the same carefully calibrated tone of grave concern, saying the same thing in slightly different words over and over and over. "I have seen direct evidence. More than circumstantial evidence. Evidence in plain sight, plenty of evidence of collusion, abundant evidence, significant evidence, compelling evidence." In the corner of the screen, a counter ticked upward with each new clip. 12 of 227, 34 of 227, 47 of 227, 68 of 227, 89 of 227, 107 of 227, 143 of 227, 178 of 227, 201 of 227, 227 of 227. It was devastating. Not because any single clip was shocking on its own. Each one had been seen before, each one had been broadcast to millions when it originally aired. But compiled together, played in rapid succession, the repetition became something else entirely. It became a pattern so clear and so relentless that it could not be dismissed as a misunderstanding or an overstatement or a difference of interpretation. It was the same claim, made in the same way, with the same certainty, 227 times over the course of 2 years, while the classified briefings that Schiff attended during the same period said, consistently and repeatedly and without exception, that no evidence had been found. When the supercut finished, the silence returned, heavier now, denser, loaded with the weight of what everyone had just seen. Trump looked at Schiff 227 times, but the actual classified briefings, the ones you attended, the ones you signed for, said the opposite. They said no evidence was found, every single one. So which is it, Senator? Were you lying to the intelligence community, or were you lying to the American people? Schiff tried to respond. His voice had lost its earlier confidence. It was thinner now, higher in pitch, the voice of a man who is trying to project authority but whose body is betraying his panic. The intelligence picture evolved over time. What we knew in March of 2017 was different from what we knew later. Intelligence assessments are dynamic. They change as new information comes in. To take a single briefing and use it to characterize the entire intelligence picture is misleading. Trump cut him off, not rudely, not by shouting over him, but with a quiet authority that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. Oh, it evolved. Let us look at how it evolved. More documents appeared on the screens. A sequence month by month of classified briefings that Schiff had attended. May 2017, Gang of 8 briefing. FBI update. No new evidence of coordination between Trump campaign and Russian government. Carter Page FISA surveillance has not revealed evidence of conspiracy. George Papadopoulos' interviews provided no evidence of coordination. Investigations ongoing. Directly below it, a note. Schiff on CNN, 3 days later, the evidence of collusion is hiding in plain sight. July 2017, Gang of 8 briefing. FBI update. Multiple interviews with campaign associates completed. Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, all questioned extensively. No evidence of conspiracy to date. Individual charges possible for unrelated matters, including financial crimes and false statements, but no coordination or conspiracy related to Russian government found. Below it, Schiff on MSNBC, 2 days later. I cannot go into specifics, but I can tell you that I have seen direct evidence of collusion. September 2017, Intelligence Assessment, Steele Dossier. FBI has determined primary source for Steele Dossier was not credible. Key allegations remain unverified after extensive investigation. Assessment. Likelihood that several allegations are fabricated is high. Dossier should not be considered reliable intelligence. Below it, Schiff continued citing Steele Dossier publicly as credible evidence of Trump-Russia collusion through December 2017 and into 2018. Trump walked through these methodically, one after another, each briefing paired with the contradicting public statement that followed it, the rhythm as relentless as a metronome. November 2017, briefing, no evidence. Schiff on television the following week, I have seen evidence. January 2018. Briefing, no evidence. Schiff on television 3 days later, the evidence continues to mount. March 2018. Briefing, no evidence. Schiff on television, abundant evidence of collusion. May 2018. Briefing, no evidence. Schiff on television, the evidence is in plain sight for all to see. Every single briefing told you the same thing, Trump said. No evidence, no coordination, no conspiracy. And every single time you walked out of that secure room and told America you had seen evidence. He put down the remote. That is not evolving intelligence, Senator. That is systematic lying. It is not a misunderstanding. It is not a difference of interpretation. It is not the complexity of the intelligence picture. Every briefing said no evidence. You said the opposite, every time for 2 years. 227 times. That is a pattern, and it is a pattern of deliberate, calculated deception. Trump picked up a different document. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, the movements of someone who has a great deal more to show and is in no rush to get through it. And then there are your phone calls. The room shifted. A new tension entered the air. Phone calls were different from public statements. Public statements could be spun, characterized as differences of interpretation attributed to the fog of a complex investigation. Phone calls were concrete. They had dates and times and durations and the names of the people on both ends of the line. They were not matters of interpretation. They were facts, recorded in the unyielding precision of telecommunications logs. See, when classified information kept leaking to the media, Trump continued, the FBI investigated. They do that. When classified information appears in news stories, the FBI traces the leaks. They get phone records. They analyze timing. They look at who had access to the information and who communicated with reporters around the time the information was published. And they got phone records, including yours. A new timeline appeared on the screens. This one was different from the others, more precise, more granular. It did not deal in days and weeks but in hours and minutes. December 12, 2016, 4:47 p.m., Phone call from Adam Schiff's personal cell phone to CNN producer John Bonfield. Duration, 15 minutes. December 13, 2016. CNN publishes story, Intel chiefs presented Trump with claims of Russian efforts to compromise him. Story contains details from classified briefing, attended by Schiff on December 11, 2016. December 18, 2016, 3:22 p.m. Phone call from Adam Schiff's personal cell phone to New York Times reporter Adam Goldman. Duration, 23 minutes. December 20, 2016. New York Times publishes story, British intelligence shared evidence of Russian interference with U.S. officials. Story contains classified details from NSA assessment brief to Intelligence Committee December 17, 2016. January 10, 2017 2:17 p.m. Phone call from Adam Schiff's Senate office to MSNBC producer. Duration, 19 minutes. January 11, 2017. MSNBC broadcasts story containing classified details from CIA assessment brief to Gang of 8 January 9, 2017. The pattern repeated, over and over. Call from Schiff to a reporter or producer. Within 24 to 48 hours, a story containing classified information from a briefing Schiff had attended. The timeline showed 43 instances over 2 years, 43 phone calls, 43 stories. The correlation was mathematical, statistical, undeniable. Not every call led to a story, but every story with leaked classified details was preceded by a call from Schiff to the reporter or producer who broke it. Trump let everyone absorb this. You did not just lie about what you saw in classified briefings, Senator. You leaked what you saw. You took classified information you were legally obligated to protect under penalty of federal prosecution, and gave it to friendly reporters. Then you went on television to confirm the stories you had leaked, creating a circular feedback loop where you were both the source and the validator of your own leaks. He looked directly at Schiff, and his voice hardened slightly, not into anger but into something colder, more judicial. That is not oversight, Senator. That is propaganda. That is using your security clearance as a political weapon. And according to the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Intelligence Identities Protection Act and a half-dozen other federal statutes, it is a felony. Schiff stood up again. His movements were jerky now, lacking the smooth confidence of his earlier performance. Mr. President, these characterizations are completely characterizations. Trump's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. These are phone records from an FBI investigation into leaks of classified information. Your phone number, your calls, your timing, reporters you called, stories that appeared within hours containing classified details from briefings you attended. That is not characterization, Senator. That is documentation. Trump pressed the remote. More phone records appeared, each one listing the date, the time, the duration, the caller, the recipient, and the story that appeared within 48 hours. The text was small but legible, and the sheer volume of it, entry after entry after entry, created a visual impression of overwhelming evidence. Want me to show all 43? Trump asked, or do you get the point? Schiff sat down. The motion was not graceful. It was the motion of a man whose legs have decided independently of his brain that they no longer wish to support his weight. He sat down because standing had become untenable, because every second he stood was another second of camera time capturing his expression, and his expression was telling a story he did not want the cameras to broadcast. He knew where this was going. He knew he could not stop it. And he knew, with the sickening certainty that comes from being trapped in a situation of your own making, that the phone calls were not the last thing Trump was going to show. Trump shifted to a new topic, but his tone remained calm, conversational, almost casual, as if he were walking through a presentation at a business meeting rather than systematically dismantling a United States senator's career on live television. The casualness was itself a weapon, because it conveyed a confidence that suggested the evidence was so overwhelming that it did not require dramatic delivery. The facts could speak for themselves. The documents could do their own work. All Trump had to do was hold them up and read them aloud. And the truth, hidden for 8 years behind classification markings and security clearances, and the impenetrable veil of national security secrecy, would finally see daylight. Let us talk about Ukraine, Trump said. September 2019, the phone call, the whistleblower, the impeachment. You remember that, right, Senator? Schiff's jaw tightened visibly. The muscles along the side of his face contracted, and the movement was captured by the close-up camera and broadcast to 78 million people. This was his worst scandal, the one he had never fully explained, the one that even sympathetic journalists had struggled to defend. You opened the impeachment inquiry hearing in September 2019, Trump continued. You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You had the gavel, you had the power, and you used that power to do something extraordinary. You read what you claimed was the essence of my phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. Let us watch. Video played. Adam Schiff, seated at the chairman's position in the Intelligence Committee hearing room, the nameplate in front of him, the gavel at his hand, speaking into the microphone with the dramatic flair that had become his trademark. His voice on the recording was theatrical, portentous, dripping with righteous indignation. The essence of what the president communicates is this: we have been very good to your country. Very good. No other country has done as much as we have. But you know what? I do not see much reciprocity here. I hear what you want. I have a favor I want from you, though. And I am going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it. On this and on that. Trump stopped the video. That is what you said in an impeachment inquiry, in Congress, on the record, while the entire world was watching. You, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, reading what you told the American people was the essence of the president's communication with a foreign leader. There is one small problem with it. That is not what I said. Not remotely. The real transcript appeared on the screen. The actual words from the actual phone call between Trump and Zelensky, as released by the White House and verified by multiple parties. Highlighted sections showed what Trump had actually said, the request to look into corruption, the mention of Biden, the specific language that bore no resemblance whatsoever to Schiff's theatrical rendition. No mention of 7 times. No mention of making up dirt. No threats. No ultimatums. Nothing that even vaguely resembled the mob boss shakedown dialogue that Schiff had performed with such conviction. The screen showed both texts side by side. On the left, Schiff's version. On the right, the actual transcript. The differences were not subtle. They were not matters of emphasis or interpretation. They were the difference between what was said and what was invented, between reality and fiction, between the truth and a lie told under oath in an impeachment proceeding. You completely fabricated dialogue, Trump said, made up quotes, put words in my mouth that I never said during an impeachment hearing. And when Republicans objected, when they called you out on it, you said it was parody. Trump's voice rose slightly, the first time it had deviated from its measured, conversational tone. Parody. In an impeachment inquiry, you are reading complete fiction into the congressional record, while millions of people watching on television think it is real, and you call it parody. He pulled out a document, polling data. 63% of people who watched your performance believed those were my actual words because you presented it that way. You did not say this is parody. You said the essence of what the president communicates. You framed it as a summary. You made people believe it was real. That is not parody, Senator. That is fraud. That is fabricating evidence in an impeachment proceeding. The room was stunned. Even reporters who had covered this story extensively at the time, who had written about the controversy when it happened, were seeing it differently now. The contrast between Schiff's theatrical reading and the actual transcript, displayed side by side on screens 10 feet tall, was starker than it had ever seemed in the original coverage, where the parody defense had been offered and accepted, and the news cycle had moved on within days. Now, stripped of context and spin and the rapid pace of the news cycle, it was just 2 documents next to each other, one containing what the President of the United States actually said, the other containing what the chairman of the Intelligence Committee made up and read into the record during a proceeding designed to remove the president from office. Trump was not finished, and let us talk about how this impeachment started. The whistleblower. You remember. Somebody filed a complaint about my Ukraine call and you went on television and said you had had no prior contact with this person. You said, and I am quoting, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower." Video of Schiff saying exactly that played on the screen. His face on the recording was earnest, sincere, the face of a man being transparent about a straightforward fact. "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to." The words were unambiguous. "That was a lie," Trump said. "Your staff met with the whistleblower 3 times before the complaint was filed. They helped him find a lawyer. They helped him craft the complaint. They coordinated the entire thing. And then you went on television and lied about it." Phone logs and meeting records appeared on the screens. August 12, 2019, 3:14 p.m. Whistleblower calls Schiff staff director. Duration 43 minutes. August 14, 2019, in-person meeting at Schiff's Capitol Hill office. Whistleblower and Schiff's chief counsel. Duration approximately 90 minutes. August 28, 2019, second meeting with Schiff's legal staff. Whistleblower complaint filed September 9, 2019. Schiff claims no contact with whistleblower September 17, 2019. "You lied," Trump said. "Got caught. Had to issue a weak correction through your spokesman 3 days later, but the damage was done. Impeachment was launched based on a complaint your office helped create, while you lied to the American people about your involvement." If you are finding this story as gripping as I think you are, take a moment now to hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps more than you know, and it makes sure you do not miss what happens next, because what comes next is even more stunning. Trump picked up another document. This one looked newer, more recent, the paper whiter, the ink darker. October 2020, Hunter Biden's laptop. The New York Post breaks the story 3 weeks before a presidential election. Emails showing potential corruption, foreign business dealings involving the son of the Democratic presidential candidate, possible crimes, possible compromises. A major story at a critical moment. And you, Senator Schiff, did something remarkable. Something that might be your single biggest lie of all. A new classified document appeared on the screens. FBI briefing, Senate Intelligence Committee, October 2020. Subject: Hunter Biden laptop. Device confirmed to be authentic laptop belonging to Hunter Biden. FBI has had possession of device since December 2019. Forensic analysis confirms emails and documents on device are genuine. Chain of custody verified. No evidence of Russian involvement in laptop's existence or contents. Device was dropped off at repair shop by Hunter Biden and subsequently turned over to FBI by shop owner. The attendance sheet appeared alongside it. Schiff's name, Schiff's signature, confirming he had been briefed on the laptop's authenticity, confirming he had seen the FBI's assessment, confirming he knew when he left that briefing room that the laptop was real. Trump read it aloud. Let every word land on the silence like a stone on glass. The FBI told you the laptop was real. They told you the emails were authentic. They told you there was no evidence of Russian involvement. You were briefed on this. You saw the forensic analysis. You signed the attendance log. And then what did you do? A video compilation played. Schiff on CNN, October 15, 2020. We know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. Schiff on MSNBC, October 17, 2020. This is classic Russian disinformation. Schiff on CNN again, October 19, 2020. It has all the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. You went on television and called it Russian disinformation, Trump said, even though the FBI had just told you it was real, even though you had seen the briefing confirming it was authentic, even though you had signed the attendance log proving you were there. You lied 3 weeks before an election to protect the candidate, using your position and your security clearance to spread actual disinformation while calling the truth disinformation. Trump pulled out more documents, and his expression suggested that what he was about to show was even worse than what had come before, which was a remarkable suggestion given what had already been displayed. But it gets even better, he said, and the word better dripped with a dark irony that was not lost on anyone in the room. The letter. Remember the letter. Everyone remembered the letter. 51 former intelligence officials signing a public statement saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story had all the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. The letter that had been cited by every major news organization. The letter that had been used by Twitter and Facebook as justification for censoring the New York Post's reporting. The letter that Joe Biden himself had referenced during a presidential debate, invoking the authority of 51 intelligence professionals to dismiss the story as foreign disinformation. The letter that had, arguably, altered the course of a presidential election. The letter appeared on the screen, its text clearly visible, its signatures listed at the bottom. James Clapper, John Brennan, Michael Hayden, and 48 others, former directors and deputy directors and analysts and operatives, all lending their names and their credibility to the proposition that a laptop the FBI had already verified as authentic was actually a Russian intelligence operation. This letter gave Twitter and Facebook the excuse they needed to censor the story, Trump said. Gave the media the excuse to ignore it. Gave Biden the excuse to dismiss it in the debate. All based on 51 former intelligence officials saying it looked like a Russian operation. He pressed the remote. Emails appeared, declassified emails from Schiff staff director to multiple former intelligence officials. Subject line, urgent, need letter on laptop story. Date, October 16, 2020, the day after the New York Post story broke. The email was detailed and explicit. It laid out talking points, suggested language, coordinated timing of the letter's release, recommended which media outlets should receive it first for maximum impact, and emphasized the need to move quickly before the story gained traction that would be difficult to reverse. More emails followed, the back and forth between Schiff's office and the former officials, responses asking for clarification on specific wording, suggestions for additional signatories, discussion of how to frame the letter so that it would be taken seriously without technically making claims that could be proven false. The phrase "all the hallmarks of" appeared in multiple emails as the agreed-upon formulation, carefully chosen because it suggested Russian involvement without explicitly claiming it, providing a veneer of plausible deniability while delivering the desired message. You orchestrated the whole thing, Trump said. Your office wrote the talking points. Your staff drafted the suggested language. Your people coordinated the timing and the media rollout. You got 51 former intelligence officials to sign a letter calling real evidence Russian disinformation. They provided the credibility. You provided the coordination. Media ran with it. Social media censored the story. 3 weeks before an election. All based on a lie you knew was a lie because you had been briefed that the laptop was real. Trump's voice was harder now, the conversational tone giving way to something with more edge, more steel. The laptop was real. The emails were real. The FBI told you, and you suppressed it anyway, to influence an election, using your security clearance and your position as chairman of the Intelligence Committee to spread lies while calling the truth disinformation. That is not protecting national security, Senator. That is election interference. That is using the apparatus of intelligence and the credibility of former officials to deceive the American public at the most consequential possible moment. 3 weeks before they voted for president, Trump stepped back from the podium, took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more intense, carrying the focused energy of a man who is approaching the conclusion of something he has been building toward for a very long time. Senator Schiff, I want to ask you a question. The same question you have been asking me for 8 years. The pause that followed was the longest of the entire press conference. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10, then 15. In that silence, every camera in the room was trained on Schiff's face. The split-screen graphics on every network showed Trump on one side, standing at the podium with the declassified documents spread before him and the massive screens displaying the evidence behind him, and Schiff on the other, sitting in his front row seat, looking smaller than he had when the press conference began, diminished, as if the weight of what had been shown was physically compressing him. The confident prosecutor who had stood up an hour ago and asked a question designed to corner the President of the United States was gone. replaced by a man who looked like he was trying to decide between several equally terrible options, and finding that none of them offered anything resembling escape. How many times did you lie to the American people? The silence was absolute. In living rooms across America, people held their breath. On social media platforms, the live comment feeds, which had been scrolling at thousands of messages per minute throughout the press conference, went nearly still, as if even the internet itself was waiting for the answer. Was it the 227 times you claimed you had seen evidence of collusion that your own classified briefing said did not exist? Trump's voice was measured, each word placed with precision. Was it the 43 times you leaked classified information to reporters and then went on television to confirm your own leaks? Was it when you fabricated my Ukraine call transcript and read complete fiction into the congressional record during an impeachment hearing? Was it when you lied about coordinating with the whistleblower? Was it when you called a real laptop Russian disinformation after being briefed that it was authentic? Was it when you organized 51 intelligence officials to lie to the American people 3 weeks before an election? Trump's voice was rising now, not into a shout. The cadence was too controlled for that, but the intensity was building with each question, the volume increasing incrementally, the pauses between questions growing shorter, creating a rhythm that was almost musical in its construction, each question landing like a drumbeat. How many times, Senator? How many times did you use your security clearance as a weapon? How many times did you leak classified information for political gain? How many times did you look into cameras and lie about what you had been told in secret briefings? How many times did you tell the American people to trust you, to believe you, that you had seen evidence they could not see, knowing the whole time that the evidence said the opposite? He gestured to the screens, still filled with documents, timelines, phone records, side-by-side comparisons. You spent 8 years calling me a liar, a traitor, a Russian agent. You impeached me twice. You ran investigations designed to destroy me. You went on television almost every single day telling America I was compromised, that I was a threat to democracy, that I was Vladimir Putin's puppet. And the entire time, you were the one lying. Provably. Documentedly. Systematically. Trump leaned on the podium, his hands gripping its edges, his body slightly forward, projecting toward the man in the front row. These are not theories. These are not partisan attacks. These are not opinions. These are declassified government documents, your signature on briefing logs, phone records from FBI investigations, video of your own statements contradicted by the actual classified intelligence you were shown, timelines showing your leaks, emails showing your coordination. The evidence is not debatable. It is not open to interpretation. It is not taken out of context. You lied, hundreds of times, maybe thousands. You used your position to leak classified information and spread propaganda. You fabricated evidence. You suppressed the truth. You orchestrated disinformation campaigns, all while wrapping yourself in the flag and claiming to defend democracy. He straightened up, drew himself to his full height. So I am going to ask you one more time, in front of the American people, in front of these cameras, with all the evidence on display. How many times did you lie, Senator Schiff? The room was dead silent. 78 million Americans watched from their homes. Billions more would see the clip within hours. Every eye was on Adam Schiff. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out, not because he did not have words. Adam Schiff always had words. He had built a career on having words, on always knowing what to say, on being the most articulate person in any room, the man who could frame any situation in the most favorable light, who could explain away any contradiction, who could spin any failure into a triumph of democratic oversight. He had words for everything, but he did not have words for this. Because what could he say? Every document Trump had shown was real. The classification markings were authentic. The declassification stamps were legitimate. The signatures were his. The dates were accurate. The timelines were precise. The phone records were from an FBI investigation. The emails were from his own staff's accounts. The video clips were his own appearances on his own favorite networks. Every contradiction was undeniable, not arguably undeniable, not probably undeniable. undeniable in the most literal sense of the word. There was no way to deny them, because the evidence was sitting on screens 10 feet tall for the whole world to see. His own signature on briefings that said no evidence. His own words on television saying the opposite. His own phone records showing calls to reporters that preceded classified leaks. His own staff's emails coordinating the laptop letter. His own fabricated dialogue read into the congressional record. His own lies about the whistleblower. All of it documented. All of it declassified. All of it undeniable. All of it displayed in high definition for 78 million Americans, and every journalist in the room, and every historian who would study this moment for decades to come. Trump waited. He let the silence stretch. He let America see that Adam Schiff, the man who always had an answer, the man who had spent 8 years accusing the president of hiding from tough questions, had no answer of his own. The silence itself became the answer, more eloquent and more damning than anything Schiff could have said. Finally, Trump spoke again, quieter now, almost sad. The anger was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like pity, which was perhaps the most devastating tone of all, because pity from your adversary is worse than rage. You do not have an answer, because the answer is hundreds of times, maybe thousands, so many you have probably lost count. So many that lying about classified information became as natural to you as breathing. You spent 8 years as the face of the Russia investigation. The intelligence expert Americans were supposed to trust. The man who had seen the evidence we could not see. The guardian of classified truths too sensitive for public consumption. And you were lying the whole time, using classified information as both a sword and a shield, leaking what helped your narrative, hiding what hurt it, making up what did not exist, calling truth disinformation and calling your disinformation truth. Trump gathered his documents slowly. The American people deserved better. They deserved the truth. They deserved someone who would use their security clearance to protect them, not to manipulate them. Instead, they got you. The remaining 37 minutes of the press conference were almost anticlimactic. Other reporters tried to ask questions. Some asked about the documents, seeking verification and additional context. Some asked about policy and legislation, attempting to steer the event back toward normal territory. Trump answered some of them, deflected others, but everyone in the room knew that the story had already been written. The press conference was over the moment Schiff could not answer the question. Everything after that was denouement. Schiff sat frozen in his front row seat for the duration. He did not ask another question. He did not attempt to defend himself. He did not stand up and challenge the documents or offer alternative explanations or do any of the things that a man in his position should have been doing if the evidence against him was as misleading as he would later claim. He just sat there motionless, his expression carefully neutral in the way that only someone making a deliberate effort to show no expression can achieve. While other reporters asked questions about FBI reforms and intelligence community morale and legislative priorities, and all the things that suddenly seemed profoundly unimportant compared to what had just happened. Trump kept circling back. He could not help himself, or perhaps he could and chose not to, recognizing that every reference reinforced the devastation. When a CNN reporter asked about FBI reforms, Trump said, "Well, as Senator Schiff now knows from the documents we showed today, the FBI was actually telling the truth the whole time. They kept saying no evidence." Schiff kept lying. The problem was never the FBI's intelligence gathering. The problem was a member of Congress who systematically misrepresented what the FBI told him. When an MSNBC reporter asked about intelligence community morale, Trump gestured to the screens, which were still displaying documents. Unlike some people in this room, the intelligence community was honest. They gave accurate briefings. They wrote accurate assessments. They did their jobs. It is not their fault that certain members of Congress lied about what they were told. Each time Trump mentioned Schiff or referenced the documents, the cameras would cut to the front row, and there he would be, still sitting, still expressionless, the confident prosecutor from the beginning of the press conference, replaced by a man who looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him. His aide, the young man in the gray suit who had been sitting behind him, was texting frantically on his phone, presumably alerting Schiff's office, his communications team, his lawyers, his political advisors, everyone who would need to begin the impossible task of damage control. When Trump finally called the press conference to a close at 3:43 in the afternoon, Schiff stood up immediately. He did not wait for the room to clear. He did not try to spin the story with nearby reporters, which was the standard politician's move after a damaging event. Grab a few friendly microphones and start framing the narrative before anyone else could. He just pushed through the crowd toward the exit, his aide running interference, creating a physical barrier between Schiff and the cameras and the reporters who were converging on him from every direction. They swarmed him anyway. "Senator Schiff, do you dispute any of the documents the president showed? Did you leak classified information to reporters? Why did you say you saw evidence when the briefing said there was no evidence? Will you resign from the Intelligence Committee? Do you have a response to the president's accusations? Can you explain the contradiction between the classified briefings and your public statements? Is it true your office coordinated the laptop letter? Senator, do you have any comment at all?" Schiff said nothing. He kept walking, his eyes fixed on the door, his jaw set, his expression the carefully composed blank mask of a man who knows that any word he says will be replayed millions of times, and analyzed syllable by syllable and used against him in ways he cannot yet predict. He pushed through the doors of the East Room and disappeared into the corridor beyond, his aide close behind, the doors swinging shut behind them like the closing of a curtain on the final act of a play. Trump stayed in the East Room for another 15 minutes. He shook hands with reporters. He answered a few more questions, lighter ones, about upcoming legislation and foreign policy meetings and things that had nothing to do with Adam Schiff or declassified documents. He looked relaxed, satisfied, like someone who had just finished a job that needed doing and was content with how it had turned out, because he had, and because it had. Within 2 hours, the internet exploded. Before Schiff had even left the White House grounds, clips from the press conference were everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, Threads, every platform simultaneously, spreading through social networks with the velocity of something that transcends partisan loyalty and enters the realm of pure spectacle. The "how many times did you lie" question hit 93 million views in the first 90 minutes. The footage of Schiff's face when Trump showed the first classified document, the cycling through confusion, recognition, realization, horror, and panic, reached 81 million views. The side-by-side comparison of Schiff's public statements versus the actual briefings hit 127 million views within 3 hours. The supercut of Schiff's 227 appearances claiming he had seen evidence reached 76 million views, and people watched it over and over, counting along with the ticker, sharing it with commentary that ranged from outrage to disbelief to dark humor. He said this 227 times. The briefings said the opposite, all 227 times. How is this not a crime? The comparison of Schiff's fabricated Ukraine transcript versus the real one reached 98 million views. The split screen was devastating. Schiff's theatrical mob boss dialogue on one side, Trump's actual words on the other. The contrast so stark that it did not require commentary to understand. The phone record timeline showing Schiff's calls to reporters followed by classified leaks hit 67 million views and generated hundreds of thousands of posts dissecting each entry, connecting each call to each story, tracing the pattern of leak and amplification that Schiff had maintained for 2 years. Conservative media went supernova. Every network, every show, every podcast, every website led with the story and stayed with it for days. Schiff destroyed by declassified documents. 8 years of lies exposed in 1 hour. The liar finally faces the evidence. How Adam Schiff fooled America for 8 years. They played the clips on repeat, analyzed each revelation with panels of former intelligence officials and legal experts and political strategists, dissected the timeline of briefings versus television appearances, examined the phone records in granular detail, replayed the fabricated transcript comparison until it became the defining image of the press conference. Liberal media tried to defend Schiff, but the effort was visibly strained. MSNBC led with Trump weaponizes declassification to attack political enemy, a framing that attempted to shift the focus from the content of the documents to the motive behind their release. CNN went with questions raised about selective document release, suggesting without evidence that Trump had cherry-picked the declassified materials to present a misleading picture. But even their own panels could not maintain the defense under the weight of the evidence. "Look, I think Trump's motives are political," one CNN analyst said during a panel discussion that was supposed to be defending Schiff but had gone badly off script. "Everyone in politics has motives, but these documents. Schiff's signature is on briefings that say no evidence, and he went on our network the next day and said he had seen evidence. More than circumstantial evidence. How do we explain that? How do we defend that? I am not sure we can." Another MSNBC host tried valiantly to provide context. "Intelligence assessments evolve over time. What appears to be no evidence at one point might become evidence later as new information is gathered and analyzed. Assessments are not static, they change. And to take a single assessment from a single briefing and use it to characterize." But he didn't say the assessment evolved, the guest interrupted. He didn't say new evidence emerged later that changed his view. He said he had seen direct evidence, more than circumstantial evidence, the day after attending a briefing that explicitly said no evidence had been found. That is not evolution. That is contradiction. Direct, unambiguous, documentable contradiction. The best defense liberal media could muster was that the documents might be taken out of context, that more information was needed, that the full picture might tell a different story. It was weak, and everyone knew it was weak, because the documents had dates and signatures and official seals and classification markings and declassification stamps. They were not ambiguous. They were not susceptible to spin. They said what they said, and what they said was that Adam Schiff had been told one thing in classified briefings and had said the opposite on national television, repeatedly, systematically, over the course of years. Social media was brutal. Schiff lied trended #1 worldwide within 15 minutes of the press conference ending and stayed there for 3 days. 227 lies hit #2. Declassified evidence was #4. Even accounts that had defended Schiff for years, that had retweeted his statements and amplified his accusations and treated his claims of classified evidence as gospel, were struggling to maintain their positions. "I defended this man for 8 years. He told us he had seen evidence. The briefings say he saw the opposite. I feel betrayed. How else am I supposed to feel? Those documents are real. His signature is on them. The timeline is undeniable. How do you explain this? I am asking sincerely. How? I hate Trump. I hate everything he represents, but I cannot defend this. Schiff lied to us, repeatedly. Using classified information we could not verify. That is not resistance. That is manipulation. He manipulated us. The fabricated transcript thing alone should end his career. He made up quotes and read them into the congressional record during an impeachment proceeding. That is not parody. That is fraud." The New York Post, which had broken the Hunter Biden laptop story and had been censored on social media for publishing it, ran a special edition. Vindicated, the front page read in enormous letters, "How Schiff and 51 Intel officials lied to suppress our story." The accompanying article detailed how Schiff's lies had led to the Post being locked out of its Twitter account, how Facebook had suppressed the story's reach, how the letter from the 51 intelligence officials that Schiff's office had orchestrated had been used as the justification for the most significant act of political censorship in American social media history. By midnight, every major news organization in the world had the story as their lead. Schiff faces questions after Trump declassifies intelligence briefings. Timeline shows Schiff statements contradicted classified assessments. Phone records link Schiff to classified leaks. Documents reveal Schiff office coordinated laptop letter. And Adam Schiff, who had walked into the White House that afternoon believing he was about to hold Donald Trump accountable for 8 years of alleged wrongdoing, was trending as the biggest political story in years for all the wrong reasons. The next week was a political earthquake, and the aftershocks continued for months. Ethics complaints started filing within hours of the press conference ending. Citizens, advocacy groups, legal organizations, and fellow members of Congress submitted formal complaints to the Senate Ethics Committee alleging that Schiff had violated his oath, mishandled classified information, misled the public, and used his position for partisan purposes in ways that violated Senate rules and federal law. By the end of the first week, 27 separate complaints had been filed. Each one cited the declassified documents. Each one listed specific instances of contradiction between Schiff's public statements and the classified briefings he had attended. The Senate Ethics Committee, which normally moved with the glacial pace of an institution designed to protect its own members, announced within 4 days that it would be conducting a preliminary review. The Department of Justice announced that it was reviewing the FBI's leak investigation for potential Espionage Act violations. The announcement was carefully worded, noting that this was not a guarantee of prosecution, but merely a review of the evidence to determine whether the phone records and the pattern of leaks warranted further investigation. But the political damage was instantaneous and severe. The mere announcement that the Department of Justice was looking into whether a sitting senator had committed felonies by leaking classified information was enough to make Schiff radioactive. Colleagues who would normally have rallied to his defense in the name of partisan solidarity found reasons to be unavailable for comment. More damaging than the investigations was what happened within the Senate itself. Republican senators called immediately for Schiff to be removed from the Intelligence Committee. This was expected, standard partisan posturing that would normally be dismissed as political theater, but then something unexpected happened. Democratic senators started joining the call. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough that it became clear this was not going to be a party-line vote. Enough that the Democratic leadership, which had initially planned to circle the wagons and defend Schiff as a victim of Trump's political vengeance, realized that the wagons could not be circled because too many of their own members were standing outside them. The Senate voted on a resolution to remove Adam Schiff from the Intelligence Committee pending investigation into allegations of mishandling classified information and misleading the public about classified briefings. The vote was 67 to 33. All 50 Republicans voted in favor. 17 Democrats crossed the aisle to join them. When 17 members of your own party vote to strip you of your committee assignment, the message is unambiguous. It means they are not defending you. It means they are running from you. It means they have calculated that the political cost of standing by you exceeds the political cost of breaking ranks. And in politics, that calculation is a death sentence. The polling data confirmed the catastrophe. In California, a state where Schiff had been elected to the Senate just months earlier with comfortable margins, his approval rating collapsed from 58% to 29% in a single week. A 29-point drop, the kind of number that political scientists study in textbooks because it is so rare and so dramatic. 79% of voters, including 62% of Democrats, said they believed Schiff had lied to the public about what he knew regarding Trump and Russia. 71% said he should resign from the Senate. These were not merely bad numbers. They were numbers that ended careers. Numbers that meant you could not survive a primary challenge, could not win a general election, could not rebuild your reputation, could not appear in public without being confronted by angry constituents, could not do any of the things that a politician needs to do to remain a politician. By the second week, investigative journalists were conducting deep dives that expanded and verified and extended the evidence Trump had presented at the press conference. The Washington Post published what they called the Schiff dossier, a comprehensive timeline of every public statement Schiff had made about Russia collusion matched against the classified briefings he had attended around the time of each statement. Their reporters went through all 227 appearances, obtained transcripts, verified the dates, matched each statement against the declassified briefing materials. The conclusion was the same as what Trump had shown in the East Room. The pattern was undeniable and systematic. In no instance had Schiff's public claims been supported by the classified briefings he cited as their source. In every instance, the briefings had said the opposite of what Schiff told the public. The Wall Street Journal ran a 12,000-word investigation titled How One Senator Misled a Nation. The Adam Schiff Story. They focused on the leaks, the phone records, the pattern of Schiff calling reporters immediately before stories containing classified information were published. They interviewed former FBI officials who had worked on the leak investigations, people who had suspected for years that the source of the leaks was a senior member of the Intelligence Committee, but had been unable to prove it. The evidence of coordination, these officials said on the record, was overwhelming. The timing of the calls and the stories was not coincidental. It was too precise, too consistent, too perfectly aligned with the specific classified details that appeared in the reporting. Several former officials expressed frustration that the investigation had not been pursued more aggressively at the time, suggesting that political considerations had prevented the FBI from following the evidence to its logical conclusion. Politico published a piece titled The Collapse of Adam Schiff, How the Man Who Investigated Trump Became the Investigated. It was part political obituary, part cautionary tale, detailing how Schiff had risen to prominence during the Trump era, how the media had elevated him as a trusted voice on intelligence matters, how nobody had seriously challenged his claims because the information he cited was classified and therefore unverifiable, how his fall was so complete and so sudden that he had become a symbol almost overnight, a symbol not just of one politician's dishonesty, but of the broader failure of institutions, the media that had amplified his claims without verification, the intelligence community that had been weaponized for political purposes, the classification system that had been used to protect lies rather than national security. More declassified documents came out in the weeks that followed, each batch adding new details to the picture. Documents showing that Schiff had specifically requested that certain investigations be opened, knowing that the mere existence of the investigations would generate headlines that would leak to his favorite reporters. Communications between Schiff's staff and FBI officials, who were later fired or disciplined for misconduct, including Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, whose text messages had already been a scandal, and who now appeared to have been coordinating with Schiff's office in ways that went far beyond normal congressional oversight. A list maintained by Schiff's staff of friendly media contacts who could be relied on to run stories without subjecting them to rigorous scrutiny, ranked by reliability and willingness to publish unverified claims. And most damaging of all, a dossier that Schiff's office had maintained on Republican committee members who questioned his claims, containing opposition research, potential vulnerabilities, and suggested lines of attack that could be used to discredit them if they challenged the Russia narrative. By the fourth week, Schiff finally agreed to give an interview. Only one network was willing to have him, MSNBC, and even their executives had debated whether the reputational risk of being associated with Schiff outweighed the ratings that the interview would generate. They ultimately decided the ratings won, but the internal tension was visible in the broadcast itself. The host, who had spent years treating Schiff as a hero and a truth-teller, looked profoundly uncomfortable throughout the conversation. Senator Schiff, the host began, President Trump showed documents at that press conference that he says contradict your public statements about Russian collusion. How do you respond? Schiff looked tired. The transformation was startling for anyone who had watched him over the preceding years. He had always projected energy, intensity, the crackling alertness of a man who was constantly processing information and formulating responses. Now he looked like a man who had not slept well in weeks, which he probably had not. His eyes were heavy. His skin was gray. He looked older than he had a month ago, as if the stress had aged him in fast forward. I think these documents are being taken out of context, he said, and the words sounded hollow, rehearsed, like a phrase that had been tested in focus groups and found to be the least damaging option. Intelligence assessments evolve. What might appear to be no evidence at one point in time can develop into evidence later as more information is gathered. To take individual briefings in isolation and compare them to public statements without understanding the full intelligence picture is misleading. But Senator, the host interrupted, and the interruption itself was significant because this particular host had never interrupted Schiff before, had always let him speak unimpeded, had always treated his words with the deference reserved for someone the host genuinely admired. Your signature is on a briefing from March 2017 that explicitly says the FBI had found no evidence of coordination. And the next day, you went on Chuck Todd's show and said you had seen more than circumstantial evidence. That is not evolution. That is a direct contradiction within 24 hours. Schiff tried his old playbook. I cannot discuss the specifics of classified information on this program. There are aspects of the intelligence picture that remain classified, that provide context. It is not classified anymore, the host said. President Trump declassified it. The whole country has seen it. The briefing is available online for anyone to read. So can you explain the contradiction? Because your viewers are viewers, the people who trusted you deserve an explanation. Schiff did not have a good answer. He stumbled through responses about the complexity of intelligence work, about the need for full context, about Trump's political motivations for the declassification, about the importance of not letting political vengeance undermine the separation of powers. None of it landed. None of it addressed the fundamental, irreducible fact that he had been told one thing in classified briefings and had said the opposite on national television 227 times over the course of 2 years. The sympathetic host looked unconvinced, which was perhaps the most telling signal of all. When even the friendliest platform cannot help you, you are beyond help. The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons. Clips of Schiff unable to explain the contradictions, unable to defend the fabricated transcript, unable to address the leak allegations, played on every platform and every network. He looked defeated in a way that transcended politics. It was not the look of a man who had lost a political fight. It was the look of a man who had been unmasked, who had been revealed as something fundamentally different from what he had presented himself to be for the better part of a decade, and who knew it, and who knew that everyone else knew it, and who knew that there was nothing he could do to undo what had been done. 3 months after the press conference, the United States Senate formally censured Adam Schiff. Censure is a rare and serious action. A formal statement of disapproval voted on by the full Senate, entered into the permanent record. It is not expulsion. The censured member retains their seat, but it is a permanent mark, a declaration by the senator's own institution that his conduct has been unacceptable, a judgment that follows him for the rest of his career and into the history books. The vote was 71 to 29. 21 Democrats voted for censure, 4 more than had voted to remove him from the Intelligence Committee weeks earlier, a sign that the political ground was continuing to erode beneath Schiff's feet rather than stabilizing. The resolution cited bringing disrepute upon the Senate through systematic misrepresentation of classified information to the American public, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, fabrication of evidence during impeachment proceedings, coordination with intelligence community officials for partisan purposes, and abuse of security clearance for political gain. Adam Schiff was only the 5th senator in American history to be formally censured. He stood in the well of the Senate while the resolution was read aloud, as tradition required, and his expression was the same carefully composed blank mask he had worn since the press conference. The mask of a man who has decided that showing no emotion is less damaging than showing the wrong emotion. The professional consequences followed with the inexorable logic of dominoes falling. Book deals that had been in the works were canceled. Publishing houses that had been eager to pay millions for Schiff's memoir, his account of the Trump investigation, his defense of democracy narrative, withdrew their offers within days of the press conference and formally canceled them after the censure vote. Speaking engagements evaporated. Law firms that had been offering lucrative partnerships and of-counsel positions rescinded their offers. Think tanks that had promised fellowships and advisory positions distanced themselves. The professional ecosystem that sustains politicians after they leave office, the revolving door of book deals and speaking fees and corporate boards and prestigious appointments, closed its doors to Adam Schiff with a speed and finality that surprised even those who had predicted his downfall. The 51 intelligence officials who had signed the laptop letter became a scandal of their own. As the emails coordinating the letter became public, several of the signatories came forward to say they had not known that Schiff's office was behind the effort. They had been told it was an organic initiative by concerned former officials, a statement of professional judgment rather than a coordinated political operation. If they had known it was orchestrated for partisan purposes, they claimed, they would not have signed. Whether this was true or self-serving was debated extensively, but it added another layer of damage to Schiff's reputation. He had not just lied himself. He had manipulated others into lying on his behalf, tricking former intelligence professionals into lending their credibility to a deception that he knew was a deception because the FBI had told him the laptop was real. John Brennan and James Clapper, the most prominent signatories, both former directors of their respective agencies, refused to comment publicly. Their silence was widely interpreted as tacit admission that they had known more about the letter's origins than they were willing to acknowledge. Both faced calls for investigation, though neither was ultimately charged with any crime. The letter itself became a subject of academic study, a case study in how institutional credibility can be leveraged for political deception, how the phrase "all the hallmarks of" can be used to suggest something without technically claiming it, and how the authority of former intelligence officials can be weaponized to suppress truthful reporting at the most critical possible moment. HBO announced a documentary series, The Schiff Show: How One Senator Fooled America. The production was ambitious, a multi-part examination of all 227 documented instances where Schiff's public statements contradicted classified briefings, the timeline of leaks, the fabricated transcript, the laptop suppression, the whistleblower coordination, and the broader failure of institutions that had allowed one man to manipulate the public discourse for nearly a decade. The series featured interviews with intelligence officials who had watched in frustration as their classified briefings were misrepresented, reporters who had unknowingly served as vehicles for Schiff's leaks, and political analysts who dissected how the media's trust in Schiff had enabled his deception. 6 months after the press conference, Adam Schiff held a press conference of his own in Los Angeles. It was a small affair compared to the events that had defined his career. A modest ballroom in a hotel, a handful of cameras, supporters who looked more funereal than celebratory. Schiff himself looked diminished. The confidence was gone. The righteous certainty that had characterized his public persona for 8 years had evaporated completely. He looked like a man who knew his career was over and was performing the final ritual required of politicians who have been destroyed, the announcement that presents capitulation as choice. After much consideration and consultation with my family, he said, reading from prepared remarks with none of the spontaneous eloquence that had once been his trademark, I have decided not to seek re-election to the United States Senate. I have dedicated my life to public service, and I am proud of the work I have done. But I believe it is time to step back and focus on other priorities. It was the standard politician's resignation speech, spending more time with family, other priorities, new challenges. Everyone knew what it meant. Internal polling showed him losing a primary by 38 points. His own party's voters had turned on him with a fury that reflected not just disapproval of his conduct, but a sense of personal betrayal. These were people who had trusted him, who had believed him when he said he had seen evidence, who had donated to his campaigns and defended him in arguments and put bumper stickers on their cars, and they had learned that he had been lying to them the entire time. That kind of betrayal does not produce mere disapproval. It produces rage. Better to resign with some vestige of dignity than to be destroyed in an election that would have been the most humiliating loss in California political history. Questions came immediately. Do you regret any of your statements about Russian collusion? Do you dispute the declassified documents? Will you apologize for misleading the public? Have you spoken with the FBI about the leak investigation? Do you expect to face criminal charges? Schiff gave vague answers. He talked about standing by his oversight work, about the importance of holding presidents accountable, about his pride in his public service, about the complexity of intelligence matters and the danger of political declassification. He did not apologize. He did not admit wrongdoing. He did not acknowledge the evidence that had been spread across screens 10 feet tall for the whole country to see. He just quit and walked away, and the distance between who he had been 6 months earlier and who he was now was so vast that it seemed impossible that they were the same person. Katie Porter, a progressive congresswoman from Orange County, announced she would run for Schiff's Senate seat in the special election. Her announcement was pointed, a deliberate rebuke of her predecessor that doubled as a campaign platform. California deserves senators who tell the truth, who do not use classified information as a political weapon, who do not fabricate evidence, who do not leak secrets for partisan gain. We can do better, and we will do better. She won the Democratic primary unopposed. No other serious candidate was willing to run in a race defined by the shadow of Schiff's disgrace, where every debate and every interview and every campaign appearance would inevitably circle back to the question of whether the candidate could be trusted not to do what the last person in this seat had done. Porter won the general election by 31 points. Adam Schiff's Senate career lasted less than 2 years. It ended not by an opponent's attack or a scandal in the traditional sense, but by the simple, devastating act of declassifying documents that showed he had spent 8 years lying to the American people about what he had been told in classified briefings. The classification system that he had used as his shield, that had made his claims unverifiable and therefore unfalsifiable, that had allowed him to say whatever he wanted about secret evidence that nobody else could see, became the weapon that destroyed him when the secrecy was removed and the evidence was exposed to daylight. 1 year after the press conference, a journalist caught up with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. The former president, or perhaps the sitting president, depending on how the timeline fell, was sitting on the patio, enjoying the Florida sun, looking relaxed and content in the way that people look when they have accomplished something they had been working toward for a very long time. "Mr. President," the journalist said, looking back on that press conference with Senator Schiff, "do you have any regrets?" Trump considered the question for a moment. Regrets? No, none at all. It had to be done. The American people deserved to know the truth. Some people said you were too harsh, that you destroyed a man's career on live television. Trump shook his head. "I did not destroy anything. I declassified documents. I showed America what their senator actually knew versus what he told them. There is a difference between destroying someone's career and revealing the truth about someone's career. He destroyed his own career by lying for 8 years. The declassification just showed people what he had been doing. If he had been telling the truth, the documents would have proved it. They did not prove it because he was not telling the truth. It is that simple. The declassification. You had been planning it for a while." Trump nodded. "Years. Since the Russia hoax first started, I wanted people to see the truth, to see what was actually in those briefings versus what Schiff and others were telling the public, but everyone said no. Too sensitive, too classified, cannot do it, national security, sources and methods. All the reasons they always give for keeping things secret. Finally got it done. Took until my second term, but I got it done. Every briefing, every assessment, everything Schiff saw, all of it. And what did it show? It showed exactly what I always said it would show. No evidence. Not in any briefing, not in any assessment, not in any FBI report. Not one single classified document said there was evidence of collusion. Not one. They all said the opposite. They all said no evidence found. And Schiff saw every one of them, signed for every one of them, and then went on television 227 times saying he had seen evidence. That is not a mistake. That is not a misunderstanding. That is not the intelligence evolving. That is systematic, deliberate, calculated lying. Do you feel vindicated?" Trump smiled. "I feel like the truth finally came out. That is what matters. It took 8 years, cost me 2 impeachments, cost the country millions of dollars and years of division, tore families apart, destroyed reputations, poisoned our politics. All because one man decided to lie about what he saw in classified briefings, and nobody could prove he was lying until the briefings were declassified. But yeah, the truth came out. It always does eventually. What should people learn from what happened?" Trump thought for a moment, looking out across the manicured grounds of Mar-a-Lago, and when he spoke, his voice had the quality of someone delivering a lesson he had paid a very high price to learn. "When someone tells you, 'Trust me, I have seen classified evidence you cannot see,' be very, very skeptical. Demand proof, demand transparency, because sometimes the person claiming to protect you is the one lying to you. Schiff used his security clearance like a weapon for 8 years. Told America he could not show them the evidence because it was classified. Perfect cover. No way to fact-check him. No way to prove he was lying. No way for anyone to verify his claims. He used the classification system as a shield, and it worked for 8 years. Until I declassified it all and everyone saw he had been lying the whole time. He looked directly at the camera. The receipts do not lie. They never do. And when you finally see them, the truth is undeniable. The declassified documents became a permanent part of the historical record. They were uploaded to government websites, archived by the National Archives, cataloged by libraries, and made available for download by anyone with an internet connection. They were cited in academic papers and legal briefs and congressional testimony. They became primary sources in the study of political deception, institutional failure, and the abuse of classification authority. Journalism schools began teaching the Schiff case as a core component of their curricula. The lessons were multiple and sobering. The importance of verification when government officials make claims about classified information. How reporters should maintain skepticism even towards sources they trust and admire. How to cross-reference public statements against public records for inconsistencies. How the classification system can be used to protect lies as easily as it protects legitimate national security secrets. How one senator fooled the media for 8 years because nobody could access the classified information needed to fact-check his claims. And how the entire profession of journalism had failed in its most basic function, the verification of claims made by people in power, because they had trusted the wrong person. Law schools taught the case in ethics courses. Abuse of security clearance, the Schiff case, how public officials have a legal and ethical duty to accurately represent classified information to the public. How violating that duty destroys public trust, not just in the individual, but in the entire intelligence community. How legal does not always mean ethical, and how the absence of criminal prosecution does not equate to the absence of wrongdoing. How the tools of national security, security clearances, classification authority, access to intelligence briefings, carry with them obligations that transcend partisan politics. The intelligence community implemented new protocols in the aftermath. They were informally called the Schiff Rules, though nobody used that name in official documents. Members of Congress who attend classified briefings are now required to certify in writing that they will not misrepresent the contents of those briefings in public statements. Penalties for making public statements that contradict classified briefings include loss of security clearance and removal from intelligence oversight committees. A mechanism was established for the intelligence community to request declassification review when members of Congress make repeated public claims that the intelligence community believes are inconsistent with classified briefings. A congressional reform bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Its official title was something long and bureaucratic, but everyone called it the Schiff Accountability Act. It created formal oversight mechanisms for members of Congress who sit on intelligence committees, including requirements for regular compliance reviews, mandatory reporting of contacts with media regarding classified matters, and expedited declassification procedures when members are accused of misrepresenting classified information. The bill passed the Senate 89-11. Adam Schiff was one of the 11 who voted against it, in one of his final acts as a senator, a vote that was noted with bitter irony by virtually every commentator who covered it. The Wikipedia page for Adam Schiff was completely rewritten. The article had previously led with his role investigating Trump, his leadership of impeachment inquiries, his career as a federal prosecutor, his election to the Senate. Now the first paragraph mentioned his documented pattern of misrepresenting classified intelligence, and noted that he had been censured by the Senate for bringing disrepute through abuse of security clearance and misleading the public. Entire sections were devoted to the controversies and scandals that had consumed the final chapter of his political career, the declassified documents contradicting his public statements, The phone records showing leaks to reporters, the fabricated Ukraine transcript, the whistleblower coordination, the laptop suppression, the orchestration of the 51 officials' letter, all documented with citations to the declassified materials, to the Senate censure resolution, to the investigative reporting that had followed the press conference. His legacy was no longer the man who stood up to Trump. It was no longer the defender of democracy or the guardian of classified truths. It was the man who lied about classified information for 8 years and got caught when someone finally declassified it. The man who used his security clearance as a weapon and his position as a shield. The man who told America to trust him because he had seen evidence they could not see, and who was revealed, when the evidence was finally made visible, to have been lying the entire time. And the moment that ended his career, the moment that exposed 8 years of lies, the moment that showed the world who Adam Schiff really was beneath the carefully constructed persona of the righteous public servant, became one of the most watched and most studied political moments in American history. Not because of drama or conflict or great oratory, though it had elements of all three. Not because of the spectacle, though the spectacle was undeniable. But because of something much simpler, much more fundamental, much more powerful than any of those things. Declassified documents, government records with dates and signatures and official seals. The permanent, immutable, undeniable record of what Adam Schiff was told in classified briefings versus what he told the American people 227 times, with receipts.